Hello and welcome everybody to the fourth Monarch Safe session. I'm really excited about this one, and we're going to be diving into a topic today that is super relevant for all of our partners out there with zoos. And this will be fantastically relevant to programming that all of the audience members out there could probably do with their guests. And we're talking about community science and community engagement. We have a fantastic lineup today of panelists. We have 3 members from Monarch Joint Venture. We have our tried and true friend, Katie Lynn Bunny, who's going to be here. And along with her are Jen Thiem and Kristen Nelson, who are science coordinators with the Monarch Joint Venture. And so this is really like their time to shine, because they are experts in this. And I'm super excited because I know that this is going to be super valuable to me, because I'm expecting to be able to walk away with a lot of new information from here. So the presentation itself will be about half an hour long, half an hour, 40 minutes long, and then we'll have some time for a Q&A afterwards. So if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box below, and then we'll address those at the end. But that's enough for me. I'm going to hand it over to Katie Lynn and friends, and away we go. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Zach, and thanks everybody for joining today. Seeing some familiar names once again, so I'm glad this time is working out for some of you. As Zach said, I'm Katie Lynn Bunny. I'm the education coordinator for the Monarch Joint Venture, and I sit on the steering committee for the SAFE Monarchs group. I'm joined today by 2 wonderful colleagues, Kristen and Jen. I'll let them introduce themselves now, and then we'll get started. Jen, you want to go first?
Thanks a lot, Katie Lynn. Good to be here. I'm Jen Thiem. I'm a science coordinator with MJV. I'm based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but I work on our science and research projects throughout generally the Midwest and Eastern US, so in the Eastern monarch population range. And then I'll kick it over to Kristen.
Yeah, great, thanks. I am Kristen Nelson. I am a science coordinator with MJV based in San Luis Obispo, California. And similar to Jen, but with a different territory, I work on our science and research projects, mostly in the Western landscape.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. Is everybody seeing the right screen? You see the PowerPoint and not the notes. Okay, good. Okay, thanks. Okay, so we're focusing today on, Monarch community science and, what the options are, why it's there. And before we get into the options, all of you are the experts for how to engage your audiences at your institution. So we have ideas, but ultimately what you do obviously is up to you, and you might have to tweak it and change it from year to year depending on your audiences, but really it's what has worked for your audience, and hopefully we'll be able to open it up in the chat later with some ideas for how others have done things like this that's worked for them, and I would be happy to curate the responses to that and share that out in the follow-up email from Zach later. So really, my main suggestions for some of that right now is modeling it. So doing the programs yourselves as an institution, and then finding ways to either host a training for some of these programs at your zoo or aquarium, or host some volunteer events where they can get some free training. And then obviously our toolkits also have resources for how participants from your zoos and aquariums can get involved as well. Okay, so to start things off, Monarch community science has a long, rich history. So it's been very instrumental in helping us learn pretty much everything that we know broadly about monarchs and monarch conservation. It began, monarch conservation or monarch community science began in the 1950s with Fred Urquhart's Insect Migration Association. That was, incorporating or involving hundreds of volunteers tagging butterflies to learn where they went in the winter. And that tagging program is continued today through Monarch Watch, the Monarch Watch tagging program, and then also the Western in the West, the Southwest Monarch Study does tagging as well, which we'll talk about those programs a little bit later. The scientific benefits to monarchs is obviously super important. The data that's generated by community scientists also, allow researchers to answer big questions that could never be considered using our traditional academic research methods, because, monarchs have this huge geographic range. The extent of their population is so broad. So there's no way that scientists could monitor the entire population at all times. So community science can offer a really unique opportunity to answer some of those population level questions. And the countless hours spent by, thousands of our dedicated volunteers have allowed scientists to answer questions about how and when monarchs use available habitat, how their numbers change within and among years, how environmental disturbances affect all of those variations, and then also how monarchs are responding to some of these global changes and conservation efforts that we're seeing. The health of the monarch population also serves as a symbolic representation of the health of our land and ecosystems and other species that aren't as easily studied. And the monarch's decline is an indication that we're facing some pretty serious environmental issues that need to be addressed. And this is something that really can inspire volunteers to take action. As all of you at zoos and aquariums can experience and attest to, not everybody, sometimes people get really down with, the state of things and hearing all of the news about the declines of populations, and community science allows an action, an action that people can take, something that they can physically do to help us learn more and expand our knowledge and conservation efforts for monarchs. So related to that, there's also a huge boost to engagement benefits as well. So monarchs are declining, and monitoring is an important conservation tool. But by engaging volunteers in all of these processes, the youth and adults that are involved in all of those are also gaining experience in science and conservation, providing environmental stewardship for their community. And it really can be really exciting, fascinating, fun, and an interesting way to engage your audiences. So, question in the chat: have you or your institution participated in a monarch community science before? And if so, drop it in the chat. We're just kind of curious what everybody has experience with. And if you don't have any experience with it, that's fine too. Nature's Notebook. Nature's Notebook is a good one. I have some experience with that one. That one focuses on phenology. Yay! Party for the Planet. Some personally participating through tagging and releasing. iNaturalist and Seek. I love both of those apps. Tagging with Monarch Watch. Yes, wonderful. Okay, so we will be touching on some of those today, and also some that you haven't mentioned. There are a lot out there. Monarchs are probably one of the most intensively monitored organisms out there. Somebody somewhere is monitoring something about monarchs at any given point in the year. So there's something for everyone. So how do you know which one is right for you? A lot of the programs that we'll be talking about today can really vary in both their physical intensity and the amount of time that it takes, but also sometimes in the background knowledge that's needed and which life stage it focuses on. There's also some obvious differences in geography. Not everybody has access to, counting monarchs in California during the winter. Not everybody can tag monarchs, and there's also some limitations with, time of year and things like that too. So if you do have any questions about which one of these programs might be right for you, or if your audiences have any of those questions, we have lots of resources that we'll share today, and you're always welcome to contact us and we can help we can have some conversations with whoever's interested and help them figure out what might be right for them. So the time and availability, the time and availability is a key piece of that. But I also mentioned that geography, and then interest is another key thing. So there are a lot of programs out there, but not everybody's interested in doing something about, looking for eggs and caterpillars. They want to do something with the butterflies, or they're not that interested in doing something with the butterflies because most of those programs involve handling them and they might not feel comfortable with it, but they feel totally okay with counting eggs and caterpillars on plants. So we'll start with some of those one-time observations, those really easy access points to monarch community science. The first one I'm going to mention, and this will come up again, is iNaturalist. Now, iNaturalist is not specific to monarchs. Those of you who have experience with iNaturalist knows this, you know how amazing it is, but is not specific to monarchs. However, you can report your one-time observation of any organism, including monarchs and milkweed and flowering plants, the nectar plants that monarchs need, onto the iNaturalist app or on a computer. And when you do that, the app will provide some suggestions for what your picture is, so that you can verify it. And then if you're unsure, there are some crowdsourced confirmations of identifications as well. So it's a really easy program to get involved with. There are monarch scientists that are using data from iNaturalist to help us learn more about where monarchs are, where milkweed can be found, where nectar plants are. So it does provide some valuable information. Journey North, again, is not specific to monarchs, although we use it primarily for monarchs. Monarchs and milkweed are just two of the organisms that Journey North tracks. Anyone in North America can participate in Journey North. It takes about 10 minutes to do an observation, but you can report a one-time observation of monarchs at any stage and milkweed at any point in the year. And what's really great about Journey North is that they create these really awesome maps. And I like to use Journey North as an educational activity for classrooms and students that I work with sometimes. But it's also really great for, just learning where monarchs might be at. I look at it every spring to see how close the monarchs are getting to where I am in Minnesota, and whether or not milkweed is coming up in places around me so I can start looking for it in my yard. So I love their map so much, but it's really easy to participate. All you need to do is register, create an account, select your species, whether it's milkweed or monarchs, and then indicate which type of sighting you're reporting. So is it egg, larva, or adult? And then is it first of year? Is it a roosting monarch? Is it a breeding monarch? And all of those options are in drop-down menus there. The other really wonderful thing that Journey North has is this symbolic migration that connects participants in Mexico, the US, and Canada. So you can engage participants. Usually it's formal classrooms, but essentially what you do is sign up for this program, you decorate and cut out some symbolic ambassador monarch butterflies that are then mailed into the symbolic migration and redistributed to schools and youth near the monarch butterfly biosphere reserve in central Mexico. And then they spend the winter there, and then new monarchs are sent to you. Monarchs from other parts of the country are sent to you in the spring. You almost will never get the same monarchs back that you sent in the fall. I know one teacher who got one butterfly and that her classroom did, and as she was passing them out, she happened to hand the butterfly back to the same kid who decorated it, which the chances of that happening are very small, but I just thought it was funny that happened to her classroom. So this program is really wonderful because it's a great way to engage in some of the cultural aspects of it as well. And they also generate maps for the symbolic migration, just like they do for the migration itself. This is the current reporting of first adult monarch sighted for 2022 in all of North America. You can animate these maps. You can choose which time period to view the maps through the slider that you see there. And then you can upload photos if you want as well. So each one of these dots represents one sighting, and the ones with photo squares in them have photos. Okay, Kristen, you want to talk about the Western?
I do. Yeah, thanks, Katie Lynn. So the Western Monarch and Milkweed Mapper is a really great and simple way for folks to participate specifically in the West. So the geography for this particular opportunity is focused on the Western population. And again, this is just an easy way to record one-time observations of either milkweed or monarchs at any life stage. Recording observations is really quick, and you can do it either online on your computer through a website or through the iNaturalist mobile app, which Katie Lynn just talked about. And I'm a huge fan of because of the easy access to it, if that's an option and a preference for you. And then this contributes to really important data set that researchers, like Katie Lynn mentioned, there are monarch researchers as well as other general phenology and science researchers using specifically the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper and also all of the data that gets put into iNaturalist. And for the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper, all the data that goes into that, it's really helping researchers fill important data gaps about things like everything that Katie Lynn has already mentioned, right? Things about distribution of different species of Western milkweeds. And that can be really important. It's honestly a big question mark, like where are all of our milkweeds out on the landscape? It's sort of a different animal out in the West than it is in the Midwest, where maybe a roadside is just filled with common milkweed. It's not generally quite so dense and abundant. So that's a really important, piece of data that we want to help fill in, and you can do that easily using this community science engagement. It also answers questions about where monarchs are breeding in the West, which again can be really hard to just find out on the landscape. It can be really sparse and spread out, and so all of these observations are super important. And also when monarchs at any life stage are recorded at a particular location is really helping researchers understand where what the migration is looking like in the West and where monarchs are going during the summer breeding season. So you can click over to the next slide, Katie Lynn, and to report an observation, this is relatively similar to Journey North. This is a couple screenshots here that you might see if you actually logged in through the website online. So to report an observation, you need to capture at least one photo or a couple photos can be really helpful on your camera or your phone. And if you don't have location or geotagging enabled on your camera device, whatever it is, note the location and some information about the habitat. And I'm thinking specifically if you're going to make the observation in the field and then at a later time go back to your computer or even into the app and make the observation later. So while you're there making the observation, make some notes. And then you would go to, we've got the website down at the bottom of the slide there. If it's not cut off, you go to monarchmilkweedmapper.org. You create, yeah, that's good. Create or log into an existing account and upload your photos. And you fill out as much information as you can in the given fields, which I've just got a couple screenshots here. And if you're going to do this, it might be helpful ahead of time to create an account and then go look at the type of information that it's going to ask you. So again, these are screenshots from the website. If you prefer to use iNaturalist in a mobile app, you're going to be asked all the same data and you just add your observation to the Western Monarch and Milkweed Mapper project when you upload your observation. And then that way it'll be a general iNaturalist observation, but you've also asked it to be recorded specifically to the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper project. And then that way the researchers using this specific project can easily aggregate and grab all of your data. And there's one more cool piece about this project on the next slide. If you're interested, you can also search and explore the data, the entire data set through the online portal, and that's what we're looking at here. So this map, which I should just at least reference, is a demonstration or a visual of all the data that's been put into this project. And if you want to look up observations for specific milkweed species or specific monarch life stages or any specific search criteria, you can do that through the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper website, which I think is a really cool interactive way to sift through the data.
Thanks, Kristen. We'll be hearing from her again a little bit later. But before we do that, I wanted to introduce a relatively new Monarch Community Science program. I haven't had the opportunity to participate in this one yet, but it was designed to capture observations of adult monarchs that take up certain chemicals from plants. So sometimes adult monarchs will visit dry or an injured part of certain plants to take up some chemicals called PAs, or pyrrolizidine alkaloids, and I'm sure I said that wrong, but the chemicals don't provide monarchs with food or energy. So Monarch RX is looking to increase our understanding of this behavior, including its purpose and how that might be applied to monarch conservation. So again, the geography of this is in North America. It takes about 30 minutes from start to finish, and you just record your observations of monarchs on withered or injured plants. So these PAs are natural chemicals that are produced by plants, so not food. And some of the questions that they're asking are, do both males and females do this behavior? Which plants are they using? How often are they doing this sort of behavior? And are the monarchs that are gathering the PAs infected with OE? So is it a form of like self-medication for infected monarchs? And then to participate, all you need to do is create an account, record your observations, including the information there, the place, the date, the time, the temperature, the sex of the monarch. Thank you, honey. The duration of the behavior that they were there for, the condition of the plant that they were on, the part of the plant that they were on, and if you have photos or videos, that's so helpful for the researchers involved in this project. Okay, so let's move on to tagging. So some of you said that you were tagging, that you've tagged before. So this really helps track the migration and movement of monarchs, and there are multiple programs that are based on your location. The most well-known and largest, because of just the geography of North America, is Monarch Watch. So the geography of this particular program is North America, but east of the Rocky Mountains. So that Monarch Watch will only send tags to people who request them that are east of the Rocky Mountains. You can be in Canada, you can be in the United States, as long as you're east of the Rockies. But like I mentioned earlier, this is continuing the work of Fred and Nora Urquhart, and it involves placing a tiny sticker on a migratory adult monarch. So this only happens in the fall. And that sticker has a unique ID that indicates the origin of that monarch when and if it is recovered. It's really great for community events in the fall. So if you wanted to do community science at your institution and get people involved in this, this is a great one to start with. You can also fold in other programs that we'll talk about later, like testing for OE, or even reporting to Journey North or something like that also. The time commitment for this is really kind of as long as you want it to be, but you do need adult monarchs for it. So you need to order the tags, which you can do right now. You can pre-order the tags and then they'll send them to you based on when the migration will start in your area. So here in Minnesota, I already ordered our tags for the fall, and they usually get sent to us the first week of August. And then peak migration here in Minnesota is usually later on. So you can order the tag, learn how to properly place the tag. It goes on one particular part of the wing called the discal cell. It's the one that looks like a mitten, or the state of Michigan, depending on which side of the wing you're on. And then Monarch Watch also has tips on how to find adult monarchs, how to collect them. So having an aerial net is also handy, and feeling comfortable with handling adult butterflies. The correct way to handle an adult monarch butterfly is to gently grasp all 4 wings between 2 fingers and then gently press the sticker into the wing. And then it can be released. It's very lightweight. It doesn't affect their flight at all. And then once the monarch is, or if the monarch is recovered, usually along the migration pathway, but more likely in Mexico, it's reported then to Monarch Watch and added to a spreadsheet that you can go back and check. Okay, Southwest Monarch Study. Kristen.
Yeah, thanks, Katie Lynn. I think you were going to do this actually.
Totally fine. Okay. So the Southwest Monarch Study does really the same thing, but in the Southwestern US. Again, it takes about 30 minutes. It tracks the migration and breeding patterns of monarchs in the Southwest US. The one caveat with this is that if you are in California, currently you are not able to tag butterflies. I know many of you know this, but right now you're not allowed to handle or collect monarchs or any invertebrate from the wild without a scientific collection permit. So tagging and some of the other programs that we'll mention later are not possible in California at this moment in time. They have, Southwest Monarch Study has some really excellent training videos, which you could also use to watch, watch for learning how to tag a butterfly for Monarch Watch. The process is the same, but the tags are different. The tags for Southwest Monarch Study are unique to that program. There have been some really interesting results from this study, including the fact that we now know that not all Western monarchs go to overwinter in California. Some of them end up in Mexico, which is interesting to know, and key to our understanding for how to help conserve monarch butterflies. Oh, the G got cut off on that. Okay, so now we're gonna switch gears into overwintering monarchs, and this is what Kristen's gonna talk about.
Thanks, Katie Lynn. Yeah, so the Western Monarch Overwintering Count is a pretty robust community science program that has been going on since the late 90s. It's a program that the Xerces Society started, and it is entirely based in California. So this is a really fun and engaging community project that you could be involved in California. It does not involve handling monarchs. And there's two, well, let me back up. What this gives us is volunteers go out and they get trained on how to do some population estimates of overwintering monarchs. And this gives us a really great estimate of the total overwintering population size each year, as well as an analysis of the overwintering habitat. And both of those things are really, really important. So there's 2 annual count periods. Just as shown here on the slide, there's one period that is 3 weeks long, centered on Thanksgiving. And then there's a second count period that was added in more recent years, and that's a 2-week long count period centered on New Year's Day. And so this is a little bit more of an involved effort than the sort of one-off observations that you can record to like iNaturalist or all of those other programs we just talked about. And I think we can pop over to the next slide. Volunteers, as I mentioned, are, oh, actually, no, go back, I'm sorry. So if you want to be involved in this program, you reach out to your regional coordinator and you get trained on how to properly and consistently count overwintering monarchs. And this picture here on the right shows you sort of like a picture of what they look like. It's a nicely zoomed in photo, but from a distance up in the trees, it can actually take a little bit of practice and training to attune your eyes to know what to look for. And then a little practice on actually how to make relatively accurate estimates. And so once you've been trained, you get assigned one or more overwintering sites that you will either visit independently or with a partner. And then you will schedule your own visits to those overwintering sites. So counts usually occur pretty early in the morning. There's some guidance on appropriate temperature windows when you want to actually go out and do your count so that you can get an accurate count before the butterflies sort of wake up in the morning and start flying around, which makes it impossible to get an accurate count. And the time commitment for each visit to an overwintering site can be anywhere from about an hour to several hours, depending on the size of your site, how many butterflies are at that particular site, and if you're doing it as a solo count or with a partner. And so now we'll pop over to the next slide. And as I have sort of primed us, this data is super important and has given us some of the most robust data that we have about the Western monarch population size. So this is a graph that Xerces has produced aggregating all of the overwintering count data that has been collected, like I said, since the start of this program in the late 90s. And so just reviewing this graph really quick, maybe some of you have seen this before, but the green bars are showing the total population size that was counted through time. So starting in 1997 and through this past fall in 2021. And then the blue line that is tracking sort of an upward trend above the green bars is the total number of overwintering sites that were counted by volunteers during that year. And so just like a quick overview here, I mean, generally what we're seeing with all of this wonderful community science data is a clear downward trend in the Western overwintering population size through time, while at the same time, volunteers have been ramping up their efforts to count more and more sites. And so even as we're going out and as a community collecting more data at more sites, trying to find as many overwintering butterflies as we can, in general, the population has trended downwards. And I don't want to end on that gloomy note. The point is that this is really critical data that is all community science and volunteer driven. And so this here is just a couple of screenshots from the Xerces website. They have this portal where you can access a map that shows you where overwintering or where most of the overwintering sites are throughout California. And it's a really cool interactive tool, but if you do want to be involved, like I said before, you go to this portal and you reach out to your regional coordinator and you go through that process to get trained and get assigned an overwintering site. You don't just go pick one yourself. And that ensures that the data that we're covering all of the overwintering sites and spreading them out evenly among the volunteers and getting the data that we need. I think that's it, Katie Lynn. Passing on to Jen now.
Great, thanks for that overview, both of you. I'll take a few minutes here to talk about some programs that monitor monarch reproduction and their natural enemies. So here's a chance where we get to look at those monarch eggs and larvae for the most part. We'll start with Project Monarch Health. So Project Monarch Health is applicable throughout the monarch's breeding range, and it tracks the spread of this protozoan parasite of monarchs. It's called Ophryscystis electrospira. So Katie Lynn mentioned it before. It goes by OE for short. And this program involves collecting either a wild or a reared monarch and testing them for this OE, this protozoan, at home. And then you send in that that sample and send it into the Project Monarch Health so that those researchers can look at it under a microscope and evaluate the health of the monarch and the presence of or absence of OE. Go ahead to the next slide here. This is an example of what they might be looking at once you send those samples in to Project Monarch Health, which is based out of the University of Georgia. They're looking for the presence of those little football-shaped OE spores between the larger monarch scales. through this program, thanks Katie Lynn, through this program, we've learned that OE might be advancing slightly northward and westward. It's typically been more abundant in the southeast and in non-migratory populations of monarchs. And through this community science program, the project has been able to track the spread of this disease. There have been a lot of publications that are linking this disease with certain practices or certain patterns of monarch behavior. So to test for OE, all of this information is available at the Project Monarch Health website. It walks you through these pieces of information. You put on gloves. You can get a kit from them that has a little sticker. They have a video online that walks you through this process. This is something that if you're doing with your members or volunteers, of course, you probably want to practice it a couple times first so that you're comfortable following those handling techniques that Katie Lynn already mentioned. And then once you've sampled the monarch, so you've put this little clear sticker on the abdomen, you've peeled it off, there on that sticker remain a few monarch scales as well as some protozoans, some OE spores that will get sent off to Project Monarch Health. You put them on like a note card. I think that if you order the kit from them, it's a little white card that you can put all your little sample stickers on. You date them, give them an ID so you know which monarch it came from, and mail them to the address that's provided with the project information. So they've got a great website with a lot of resources on it so you can get comfortable with this process. I would strongly recommend that if you have any rearing in any way going on in your programs, that you incorporate this or another program that we're going to talk about so that you can contribute to community science through that rearing. We'll talk about rearing techniques, but this is a great way if you do have a demo cage with a monarch that you're rearing to show people. You also want to broadcast that you are contributing to community science. So the rearing activity is kind of twofold, both for the education outreach component as well as the research component. Another nice hands-on activity is the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. It goes by MLMP, and it was started in Minnesota about 20 years ago. So they've got a great data set. It just keeps growing and spreading. This is a project that helps researchers study the factors that are affecting monarchs during the breeding season. So this is something that you would do when monarchs are in your area potentially breeding. And the project looks at how populations vary in space and time. And volunteers will go out to typically a milkweed patch in their gardens or backyard and look for monarch eggs and larvae on those milkweed plants. So you can do this on a regular basis. You kind of register your site into the MLMP system and you can go back. They recommend weekly. So go out, check it weekly for monarch eggs and larvae and report that on your site. You can also do single observations. So like if you're out taking a walk by your neighbor's house and you stop to look at a few milkweed plants, you could also report those data as well. There's some other activities that are involved in the MLMP, but we'll focus right here on the ones that involve looking for eggs and larvae on milkweed and then rearing from your site. So there are a couple of required components. You go to mlmp.org. It's got all this information about the activities that you can do. So there's a couple required pieces. They definitely want to know a little bit of description of your site. So you have to enter, where your site is, about how much milkweed is there, a couple basic characteristics about your site. And then they also want to know how much milkweed is there. So they're getting a milkweed density. And they've used that in research too, to examine how egg laying may differ in different milkweed densities. And then you have a couple optional components. So activity one is measuring the monarch density. So that's where we're looking at the monarch eggs and larvae. Activity 2 is measuring rainfall. So if you want, you can measure rainfall and get a more accurate picture of precipitation in your area. Activity 3 is estimating monarch survival. So that's that rearing component. And then there's a 4th activity to look more specifically at certain milkweed characteristics. On the next slide, there's just a quick map of the existing sites, and this is just a map of all the historically registered sites. So some of them might be inactive at this point, but just to look at that geographic spread and how many hundreds and hundreds of sites and hundreds of people that have been involved in this. So the website is really great. You'll go to mlmp.org, and that green bar towards the top has places for you to get started. It has live training videos and the data sheets that you can print out, as well as an email so you can contact the program coordinator if you have specific questions. The MLMP activity 1, so looking at milkweed for eggs and larvae, can take 1 to 2 hours when you go out and check your milkweed, depends how much you have there. You would look at it for monarch eggs and larvae, and that information helps us understand how monarch abundance varies within the year. So we get to see kind of this peaks and dips in monarch reproduction within the year, early in the season, and then again later in the season in some geographies. And we can also look at how it varies between years as well as different site locations. And MLMP activity 3 is taking one of those individual larvae and taking it from the wild or from your site and rearing it in an individual container. So then you're continuing to feed it milkweed. You track the outcome. So it might eclose as an adult, and you can submit the information of, the date that it eclosed. So we know how long that pupal duration was. Was it a male? Was it a female? Or did it not eclose as a healthy adult and maybe it was parasitized? And if that was parasitized, you can actually send in that sample to the program and the sample of the parasite, and they'll identify the parasite. I think if you click, some more words will show up here, all the way down to there's a star, there's one more, there we go. So just a quick look, we have responsible rearing practices online. The MLMP has its own guide, and we have a flyer that talks about rearing monarchs. And if you're going to rear them, how to do that responsibly. This is great to communicate to your volunteers if this is a thing that you're doing. Always have your monarchs in individual containers. Otherwise, they can spread Ophircystis electroscere. They can spread OE if they're not in individual containers. Do this in small numbers. Keep it a kind of a fresh and healthy environment. Make sure to sanitize your containers between monarchs. So once one ecloses and maybe you grab a new larvae from the garden, just clean that container with a 20% bleach solution so you're not spreading disease. And of course, as we talked about, contribute your data. So make sure to track this information, let your volunteers, let your members know that you're contributing to research, and send that information either into MLMP, if that's the program you're participating in, or to Project Monarch Health. Next slide just gives you a little address of where to send those parasite specimens. So that's really neat that you have the opportunity to do this. So if your monarch is parasitized and you have like a tachinid fly, a parasitic wasp that parasitizes your monarch, you can actually send that sample in. The program gives you an address to send them in, and they'll look at it under in laboratory setting and identify it. There are live and virtual trainings for the MLMP. So I think we just had our last virtual one for MLMP last week, but there you can always walk yourself through the recorded videos. There's also written protocols, so you can learn this on your own at any time. MLMP has paper data sheets and online data entry. So there's not an app for this one. The data is a little too complex for a simple app. So you will be printing data sheets and then entering those records in your online account. So you'll have to make a user account to enter your MLMP data. Then the last program I want to talk about real quick here is the Integrated Monarch Monitoring Program called the IMMP. And this is similar to the MLMP, but gathers more information and it's applicable to larger sites. So throughout the US, you could set up a larger plot. So this is generally for sites over an acre in size. So if your institution has its own kind of wildlife prairie-like area that's an acre or larger, you could set up a whole IMMP plot and you could do something. It's got a couple optional activities. Go ahead and click to the next slide. You can do this in a variety of landscapes. There's protected grasslands, unclassified grasslands, rights of way, agricultural conservation land, right in the middle of agricultural sites, and developed open spaces. So whatever you're looking at will fall into one of these 6 categories. It might be a protected grassland, and yours would probably be a conservation site. That's often what people choose to do. There's also the option to pick a randomly selected site. We can walk you through that if you want. These activities, there's a site description similar to the MLMP. We just want to know a little bit about your site, where it is, what in general it looks like. Thank you. Perfect, Katie Lynn. Then there are 4 optional activities. Activity 1 can take a couple hours. You would do it every month, and that's looking for milkweed and the blooming plants on your site. So it often requires running a transect up and down your larger site. Can take a couple hours, gets great information on their habitat. So that's one thing that we don't get from a lot of other community science programs is you might have a record of a monarch, but we don't know that context. What was the habitat like? What was it surrounded by and nectaring on? And what was the nectar resource availability in that area? So that activity 1 allows us to get that information. Activity 2 is very similar to the MLMP. So that's the monarch egg and larvae survey, where you're walking through your larger site, your IMMP site, and looking at milkweed for monarch eggs and larvae. That could take about an hour, maybe a little more. Activity 3 is an adult monarch survey. These are all optional activities. So maybe you just have volunteers who are interested in an adult monarch survey walk, and they're walking the perimeter of your site and recording adult monarchs within 5 meters of them. And then finally, it's just like the MLMP, there's a rearing component. So you could optionally rear a couple monarchs from your site and report the survival outcome. Next slide just shows a screenshot of the IMMP website. And this gives you similar stuff that MLMP has. A lot of great resources on here. There's printed protocols, there's data sheets, because like the MLMP, you'll have written data sheets that you then enter online. It's got a guidance for getting started. It has online training videos and a whole host of additional resources, including FAQs. There's an online data entry portal that you would register. You just make an account to enter your data. And then the next slide is for additional local programs that are not necessarily relevant to very broad geographies, but if you happen to live near New Jersey, there's the Cape May Migration Monitoring Project that's been going on for a long time. A lot of these migration projects are seasonal. So you could reach out to the Peninsula Point Migration Monitoring Project in Michigan. They look for volunteers in the fall to come out and do monarch counts during migration. Same thing for roosting in Ontario. There's a program in the Pacific Northwest. And then this is probably an incomplete list here, but a lot of states have their own monitoring networks. So you can reach out if you want to find a more local program to your state and see if there's a butterfly monitoring network there.
Thanks, Jen.
Yep.
And thank you, Kristen, and thank you all of you for joining us. There were a few questions in the chat that I think Kristen answered directly, but you might have had some ideas on, how to incorporate some of these programs into your visitor engagement already. And if you have questions on that and just kind of want to talk it over, I'm always available for those types of conversations. Feel free to send me an email. I'll make sure I put all 3 of our contact information in the chat so that you have it. And then Zach will share out resources as well. But the really big takeaway with this is that there's an entry point for everybody. And the data that are collected, no matter how small or how seemingly insignificant, really do help us understand and better conserve monarchs. We wouldn't know what we know about monarchs without volunteers and community or citizen science. So it having this as part of the engagement around the Monarch Safe program at your zoo or aquarium is adding to an already rich history of these types of programs for monarch conservation. So Zach, we have like 5 minutes for questions. I know we went a little bit over what we had intended to, but hopefully there are some more questions that maybe have come through.
Absolutely, 100%. And you know what? I would love it. There doesn't need to be questions when there's just so much phenomenal content coming straight through. So that is a-okay. So you mentioned a couple of questions that were asked in the chat. I'll go ahead and just address those super fast so that they are captured here on the recorded version. We had somebody ask whether or not on iNaturalist, whether or not you have to be a part of the programs in order for it to be contributed. The answer we got there is no, it's not necessary. It does make it a little bit easier to aggregate and to find those data. So it's up to you, but it's not 100% necessary. And then my chat window just closed. So I'm going to scroll up. What was the other question? Cassandra asked, no, hold on, that's the answer. Cassandra asked, we see a lot of milkweed in the field. Should we check to see if it's already been documented, or should we go ahead and just document it again? And Kristen answered, repeat data is fantastic. That is a-okay. So it's actually really useful for the phenological observations to know when something is, not just its presence absence, but know whether it persists. So that data is great. Those data are great. So go ahead and ask it. There's another question that has come up that I find really fascinating, and I'm glad we have time because it's a tough one. I'll tell you that, but it's one that's important, I think, because community science in regard to monarch butterflies is so amazing because humans are probably one of the most important species when it comes to conservation, and monarchs give the opportunity for humans to directly observe and interact wildlife at the institutions like zoos and then also in their own backyards. And there's been a movement to address this as community science versus citizen science, because you don't have to be a US citizen to participate. It's open to everybody, and the more inclusive it is, the better. So that first step has been taken. We're calling it community science. How do we engage, more underrepresented groups? How do we truly reach the communities and increase the breadth and get as many people involved with this as possible?
I think that's a really great question. And I wish Lily was on this call because she would have a good answer for that one too. I would say the first step is, if you're at your zoo or aquarium, if you're at your institution, obviously model what you can for these programs. But if you're doing outreach in the community, often it's helpful to ask the question what they need first, and then use monarchs or other types of community science programs as a way to engage and answer those questions or get those resources, because we know monarchs and other things are really tied to our environment and the health of our environment, so they can be a tool to make those connections. But if we go into communities and assume that we know what they need or what they want or what's good for them, we're alienating those groups before we even get a chance to engage with them. So, and yeah, Jen, if you can share the link to that, the verbiage about community versus citizen science. Not everybody uses either or both. Some people disagree on which term is appropriate to use, and it really depends on the perspective. And as with lots of things in the English language, it's constantly changing. So what you feel comfortable with, or what your institution decides, that's your choice. That community science is just the term that we use here. So Kristen, do you have more to add?
Well, I was just going to add, perfect segue there for me, Katie Lynn, that, maybe sometimes what they need and what we need to plan and budget for ahead of time in a preemptive way is multiple language materials. And so that's something that does have to be planned and budgeted for ahead of time, but it can be a first step, and it's like a chicken and egg thing. If we can engage them, certain communities in different languages, then it might open that door for having that conversation about what else they need to be more meaningfully engaged.
Love it. I think that is fantastic. I'm a little worried that right as we hit the end of our time deadline, it might just end the meeting for us. And that would be tragic, because this has been such a fantastic session, and you deserve to be thanked. And I have enormous gratitude for all of your time and expertise, and I really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much, Jen, Katie Lynn, Kristen, for all of your contributions, not just to this session, but to helping save one of the most iconic species on the planet. So a sincere thank you. And to everybody who joined, there's phenomenal information here that hopefully we can all turn around and use at our home institutions and beyond. I will be sending out the link to this video. Please feel free to share it with anybody you think that would find it useful. And as Katie Lynn said, I will aggregate a bunch of information and I will send all of that out. And then stay tuned for the next session, which will be July 14th, which is going to be a really, I'm again very interested in this one, like all of them, but legit super interested in this one, which is how to be more pesticide free. This is a tricky one, because we are at institutions that need to have beautiful ornamental gardens for our guests. That's why they show up to our, cultural institutions. So how do we thread that needle of making a home for native insects in the wild, but also have, show ready, beautiful ornamental gardens, even in our pollinator spaces? This is one where I find it to be a tough nut to crack. If there are people out there that have had wins in their own gardens, please, please, please reach out. I would love to hear from you. I would love to see photos. This is one where we could really benefit from other people sharing their local knowledge and on how they've been able to do this. So again, thank you so much to the panelists, contributors, and people who showed up to get this information. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Zach.